Good afternoon. Welcome to Liliana Talks. With me in the studio today, Natasha Wood, who's a visiting fellow at Baltic Security Foundation in Riga. Welcome.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
And we have with us today Katia Elizabeth Herman, who is our research fellow at Warsaw Institute.
Good afternoon.
Welcome, and thank you very much for finding time to joining us today. Our today's topic, I would say, is very relevant, US. And we would start with something, let's say, very basic for our viewers. Could you tell us, what are current dominating powers in the US, especially that we know that the presidential elections are coming? So what is the situation?
Sure. Happy to. So I want to make a distinction as well between the policies, which we can get into, and then the election and the indictments, because I think those are distinct. I think sort of in terms of the policy picture at the moment, I think the predominant one worth mentioning at the Warsaw Institute is policy on support for Ukraine, which, remains extremely high. The most recent vote in Congress saw about 70 Republicans voting against additional support, but still resounding support, which I think is really important to emphasize. Immigration continues to be an ongoing debate, as it always is, despite the fact, I'll note, that the Biden administration has continued a lot of the Trump policies, but the rhetoric in the lead up to the election will be different. And the last one I think that's worth mentioning, which is going to be super important in the advance of the next election, is an update on abortion policy, especially because Senator Tommy Tuberville from Alabama continues to stonewall the promotion of military promotions in the Pentagon at the moment as a result of the Pentagon's abortion policy. So that has security implications, obviously domestic policy implications. So I think that's a big picture look at some of the policy issues.
And regarding the elections, because we know that there are some candidates from both of the parties, how is the battle? Because it seems to be very, I would say, vivid and harsh.
Sure.
Especially if we talk about one specific candidate. I know, Katia, you're smiling a lot when I'm mentioning this candidate, so maybe you can start.
No, please. I mean, we know that the US elections are definitely a topic discussed around the world, right? I mean, it has a lot of implications. Politics affecting domestically in the US have impacts all around the globe, right? I mean, in terms of economics, in terms of security, in terms of even health, I mean, in terms of trade, I mean, which is a contending topic right now. So we see definitely, I mean, Donald Trump as a potential candidate for sure. But as Natasha mentioned, I mean, we have the issue of the indictments. I mean, Donald Trump has faced numerous indictments now, not only federal but also state. And I will get into more details as we go with this podcast along, because federal indictments are completely different than the state indictments. The federal ones fall under the federal jurisdiction, and they can be reverted by a presidential pardon, right? Or once he arrives into power, it does not really affect his candidacy. On the other hand, the state indictments fall directly under state jurisdiction, which are completely different from court to court. So they will be set up on a bigger spotlight. I mean, predominantly the one in Georgia, faced in Georgia. And obviously, I mean, the New York the Florida one. So we have definitely a topic to discuss when it comes to Trump's presidential candidacy. I mean, we have also different other candidates like Ron DeSantis, and also Ron DeSantis is quite a unique topic and quite a unique candidate because of his numerous standings, and also because he recently faced a judicial strife in Florida as well. It was called like the Disneyland case, which also exactly, which also sets into the spotlight. I mean, how domestic policies will affect, or even state policies and state debates will affect the next presidential presidential elections.
Yes, regarding the Ron DeSantis, I also. Please correct me if I'm wrong, but I've read somewhere in the news that he had some close relations with one of the oligarchs.
Ron DeSantis?
Yes.
I'm not aware of that. It's possible.
Yeah.
I'm not following anything
Okay.
on that.
Okay, all right. But regarding the Donald Trump's potential candidacy and the federal and also state cases, so regarding the federal ones, they can be reverted, right? But regarding the state ones, not really. But if we look at Florida, for example, there's the Ron DeSantis. Do you see some kind of possibility to get rid of the cases, or how does it look like?
I think what Katya says is a really important point to note, and I think it's primarily the Georgia and then the Manhattan case, which are the state cases. The January 6th case and the classified documents case are the two federal cases, which could be removed with a presidential pardon. But I think I'm sure many of your listeners have seen the photos of classified documents in Mar-a-Lago. I mean, that is going to be a very challenging case, I think, for Trump to fight among his other legal battles. I'm not sure about the Florida connection. I think certainly it's possible, but at the end of the day, Ron DeSantis' problem right now is figuring out how to draw in voters that are right now still feeling very committed to Trump. I mean, he's really trailing in the polls still.
All right, so he has some hard work
he does.
to do.
I mean, just in short, just for our viewers as well, I mean, why we have this conversation, why it's so interesting and necessary to talk about, is that despite the fact that, I mean, these cases could be the outcome of the cases, does not necessarily affect the outcome of each individual charge. So he's been charged with over 30 accounts, right?
For 34, I think.
Over 30. So I mean, and then for every charge, there is going to be a resolution: guilty or not guilty, guilty or not guilty. So the case in itself is one, but the charges are individual under different status of the law. So he might as well be, let's say, guilty for 15 and then not guilty for another 15, but still he would be facing charges, right? I mean, and the penalties for these charges.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. And what about the Democratic side? Because I feel like we're just focusing on the Republican side, which is certainly very interesting, maybe even more emotional, I don't know, more colorful in a way. But what about the Democratic side? Because I think Joe Biden, the current president, it seems like he's the only candidate, or would there be more? I mean, we're not hearing any information from this side.
Yeah, there's one candidate who is in the running, has filed with the FEC as a candidate. I think it's safe to say that Joe Biden will be the Democratic runner-up because, the Democratic nominee. Because the candidate, Mr. Kennedy, does not have the base and the support that he would need to make a real run of it.
All right, so it's Mr. Biden.
Yeah.
I mean, I would actually shout my speculations that if it's not Biden, I mean, the best case scenario would be just to pull or to bring in Harris, you know? I mean, that would be the best case scenario.
I'm sorry, I disagree completely.
You disagree?
No. I'm feminist, but I would like to see somebody else, maybe some, more fresh,
Right.
I'm not a fan, but that's my personal opinion, and I'm also not voting in the US, so I'm safe, to express my opinion on something that I don't have any influence on. So going further to the US landscape, we have a rise of younger and also more diverse populations. And how is it changing? How is it shifting the politics? How is it shifting policies? And in general, the whole landscape?
Yeah. So in my prep, I found some really interesting things that I wanted to bring up. On the demographics piece, the shift that we're seeing right now is that millennial voters are registering as independents in much higher levels than older generations.
Right.
And so what that means, you've got about half of millennials that are still registering as independents compared to about a third of older generations. And that means that the portion of Americans that identify as independent is high. It's like 49% right now. And the portion that are identifying as Republicans or Democrats is actually more like 25%. And so you've got this enormous chunk of young voters in the middle of the parties, which is very powerful. And I think, indicates that while there aren't sort of formalized third parties that are afoot at this point, and we can talk more about that, I think there is a lot of room for, in future elections and certainly for the candidates we're looking at to capitalize on that independent bloc.
Yeah, well, on the one hand, I completely understand, but on the other hand, when we look at the societies nowadays, we're mainly aging populations. So I understand why the parties are focusing mainly on the older voters, because these are the ones that can really give them their seats, not just in the US, but also in any other countries, like whole European Union is aging continent. So that's why I also understand why most of the parties are focusing on the older voters.
Yeah.
But yes, as you mentioned, it's a huge group, 50%.
Yeah. It's about 50%, and I think the point you make is great, because at the end of the day, like this block in the middle, about 50%, some polls put it lower, but it's right around there, are all lean, or mostly lean Democrat or lean Republican. So they do end up following in line with one of the major parties. But I think that initial willingness to consider both sides is important.
Yeah. And regarding the emotions, because politics, of course, is about some programs, but I think mainly it focuses on emotions and also the ideologies that are behind certain actors, but also behind the parties. So, Katja, how the ideologies that stand behind the major parties in the US changed over time?
Well, this is a very interesting question, because it very much relates to the previous question and to what Natasha has said about the shifting in the demographics. I mean, we know for sure that demographics in the US have been shifting for the last, 20, 25 years, right? I mean, and we saw this, and we are seeing this also when it comes to the candidacy of Ron DeSantis. I mean, Florida, despite the fact that it's a majority of Latino population and a majority of African American population, still has a tendency to vote for the Republican Party against all expectations across the country, right? So we see how also the ideology plays into that. Definitely now the ideology in the United States is linked to both national policies and foreign policies, right? So what we've seen is that topics are being more highlighted rather than the complete ideology of the parties. What I'm trying to say by that is, you originally have the ideology or the agenda of the Republicans and the agenda of the Democrats. But then when it comes to specific policies and specific topics, that's the determinant factor for voters. It's not the agenda as a whole of the party. It is the topics that the voters identify more with, right? So, and this is something that has changed not only in the US, but also across Europe as well. And when we had the conversation about Spanish elections, we could also see the same. I mean, it was not the party's ideology that mattered the most. It was their stand on energy, on migration, on that, to a certain extent, the Republicans and the Democrats actually have a similar point, for instance, when it comes to Ukraine. No, not all members of the Senate, or not all members of the House, but still the majority.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly. So you find bipartisan support in the reconstruction of Ukraine, you find bipartisan support on the support to Ukraine, on the strengthening of Europe, on this kind of topics, you find a really strong bipartisan support. In other topics, as you mentioned, abortion, for instance, that's where you can find like this tipping balance with voters. So when you ask me how has it shifted, well, I think that we can see a pattern that has adapted to the international fora, so to the international scene, and of course to the domestic but turbulent times. I mean, just as my last point, I mean, one of the determinant factors was, you can see how it shifted the mentality of the American people and how it marked it before the Trump presidency and then afterwards. Even the same Republicans who would normally vote for the Republican Party won't vote for the Republican Party as long as Trump is there. So you see a clear shift in that. Some others stuck to the Republican only because of Trump. You can also see that normally in before times you would see them more going to the Democrats, now they don't. So you can definitely see a very, if I may use the word, unstable, or even uncertain landscape. And this is also
Yeah.
largely what you say. I mean, last point, because there's so many voters standing in the middle, it's also harder to predict. I mean, political scientists have a hard time to predict where are these voters in the middle going to align with in the end.
Yeah, but
yeah.
it's not just the case of the US that you mentioned, that there's this huge group of people in the middle who somehow needs to be convinced by one or the other party.
Yeah.
But yeah, like in a case, for example, of Poland, like in the past, I would say there were not that many differences between the two biggest parties in a country, because they were both, let's say, center-right parties. So you just voted for one because you just supported it, you like the politicians, but in general, the society was not so polarized as
Sure.
it is now.
Sure.
And I believe it's also the case of the US. I mean, the polarization process, which is not just, the case of Poland or US, but I would say whole world.
But that's if I may interrupt
Sure,
you
please.
just very shortly, because there's an important point that needs to be highlighted here. When we speak about polarization, we normally tend to think about two poles, right? I mean, the voter going either right or left, but this conception about right and left is also being obsolete, I mean, throughout the years. What has happened now is that this polarization has actually made the electorate to come to the center, which is, I mean, a little bit paradoxical. I mean, it's not longer about strictly to the right or strictly to the left. I mean, it is actually bringing the electorate to the center. So it's being pushed to the middle. And what we call it polarization is actually the divergence of ideology and of mentality towards the issues, not really towards one party or another.
Yeah.
You see?
Let me jump in if
Sure,
that's all right,
please.
and just kind of jump off of that and say, I think what you're saying makes a lot of sense. And I think in the House and in the Senate, for example, you do see this small but really important and very vocal group of very far right-wing Republicans who are really pushing Speaker McCarthy on a lot of their agendas. And then you continue to see polarization on the Democratic side as well. And, Katya, to the point you make, that leaves this voter base in the middle very unsure, because most people don't fall in that very extreme category. And I think a good indication of that is between 2004 and now, in every election that we've seen, either the House, Senate, or the White House has flipped, except for 2012. So you continue to see that middle group really unsure of, whether or not they want to align with that kind of extreme perspective.
I actually understand it, because we have a war in Ukraine, that we don't know exactly when will it, come to an end. We have the energy crisis, we have a food crisis, we have so many, crises at the same time. So I understand that people really need some kind of middle, calm state.
Yeah.
Nor on the left, like far left side, nor on the very far right side. So I think that's quite understandable that the group in the middle is actually increasing a lot.
Yeah. And I think, that was absolutely President Biden's objective in his one of his major pitches in his last run was, let's restore a little bit of normalcy, a little bit of moderacy, although, I wouldn't call it moderate.
The wars are always, I would say, very powerful, but,
Right,
when the politics is happening,
Right, because it pushes exactly this. I mean, it weaponizes the fear of the fear of uncertainty. I mean, when you don't know what's going to happen, you try to look the answers on the extremes. I mean, if someone can guarantee you with a high percentage that they're going to solve the issue, you tend to go for this. I mean, but the truth is that, uncertainty also drives people to look for stability.
Yes.
I mean, and this is exactly what it's been happening. I mean, yes, you mentioned right. I mean, we have the food crisis now with Ukraine, the Green Deal. China is also an important topic to discuss. I mean, the Chinese economy, how this will lead, how actually China's economic meltdown has actually pushed for protectionism in the US. And I mean, when you see this in the domestic agendas of the parties and federal and state, you could see that it's attracting the interest of the voters to follow this narrative of protectionism, and it's being a determinant variable. I mean, if you can guarantee that you will protect my my business, you're going to protect my house, you're going to protect my investments, then of course you have my support. And this is all reflected in foreign policies affecting domestic policies.
Okay, I'm sorry, but we need to do some kind of a forecast. I know we have still a lot of time, and tell me, so what are your predictions for the upcoming elections? I know it's super difficult, but I'm sorry, I need to take something.
Yeah. My prediction is that we're going to see another Biden administration.
Okay.
I think that he will certainly be the Democratic nominee. Trump will be the Republican nominee.
Okay.
And I think that there are many of us who have felt during the first Trump presidency that he got away with a lot, and that he will continue to get away with anything. I think that having 4 indictments, 4 active criminal investigations against you is a totally new ballgame. And I don't think that's going to work with the electorate next year.
So, but for example, if we would have the DeSantis as candidate, would it change something or not really?
Well, I am a little bit more pessimistic, actually.
Wow,
the way I mean, I would love to have a Democrat. I think, despite or against all the criticisms against Biden, I mean, I think that he has allowed a less proactive, I mean, if you could call it like that, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, a less proactive United States has allowed also Europe to take a stand, to take a leadership position, bigger, as Poland has done. So.
Yes, but on the other hand, don't forget that NATO is our security guarantor in the region, so I wouldn't even diminish the role of the US here, yeah.
Okay,
for
in that sense.
Next years, for sure.
The reason why I'm saying I'm a little bit more pessimistic is precisely for what we have discussed. A lot of people will opt for protectionism because it's a safeguard, a domestic safeguard, looking or reacting to the international fora. On the topics of migration, yes, migration has always been a recurring topic. But let's not forget that it's not only DeSantis who has the possibility to run as a candidate. I mean, Chris Christie is also like around the corner, and I mean,
what about Pence?
Penn also, exactly. I mean, they have also an agenda, and despite the fact that their agenda has been solely based on attacking Trump and attacking that administration or criticizing other points of the Biden administration, we also see them as potential. How do you call this? I mean, gearing up the electorate, or confuse. If it's not confusing, gearing up, I mean, or steering them from one side to another and driving confusion there. So what I'm trying to say is that, at least if you ask me for a forecast, is that we're gonna see the Republican on the rise in the upcoming months. Why? Because if something rises, something has to drop, and I think that Joe Biden administration has been dropping. And this is only on the base of the midterm, conclusions, you know. I mean, the midterms show that, I mean, Biden was not very much approved. Or his administration was not very much approved. So we're going to see the Republicans on the rise. Then we're going to see the answer of the Democrats hitting hard and evincing once again the accomplishments, which is a good thing. Europe naturally will see it coming as well. But then in the end, it will depend on how the US electorate plays its cards.
Yeah.
And we don't know for sure, but we know for sure, that anything can happen on the last,
that's
turn of
true.
events.
And you know, I also think, you may of course disagree with me, but I believe that change is always healthy. I'm not saying, certainly that, Republicans or Democrats will win. However, I believe that sometimes change is good, also for the environment. So, I'm not a citizen of the United States, so I can say it or not. But we will see. I think we have still a lot of time, and everything can happen. I don't know if it would be the Trump or Pence or DeSantis or somebody else, but it would be for sure, I think, vivid time, and especially for observers like our two
Yeah.
experts.
I think I absolutely agree with you. I think change is good, and a fresh perspective on all the complicated issues that the administration is dealing with right now is vital, but there has to be competent leadership.
Of course.
And I worry about the alternatives to the Biden administration at this point. But I think what is interesting to watch right now is how the Republican, we've got the debate happening next week, how Ukraine will be addressed and talked about.
Yes.
Obviously, Mr. Trump is famously volatile, but also, lots of concerns about how he would handle Russia and the war.
He's quite straight, I think. He's saying that he will finish the war in one day. Or...
Right. So no further questions.
No,
we're set. We're set.
I'm thinking, yeah, sure, right?
Okay. All right. Well, yeah. There we go. So, I think that as other people try and scramble in the primaries to win his voter base, you're starting to see people playing with other lines on the war. For example, you've got Mike Pence being quite vocal in support of additional aid for Ukraine. And so it'll be interesting to watch how the Republican voter base takes that.
I think everybody, and that's also what Putin wants us to do, to stop the war as soon as possible, because the West will get tired, voters will get tired, and for Putin that would be the best, right? So it's not just that the Republicans are working on the war to stop in one day, which I think is barely possible. However, there are also some talks between the Democratic officials and then Kremlin officials.
Yeah.
Right. No, I mean it's true that the war in Ukraine is a determining factor and will be a determining factor. So because let me bring Taiwan to the equation. A few months ago there was and I did a research on this. To what extent did providing aid to Ukraine diminish the aid given to Taiwan?
Yeah.
Now this we can quantify it and we can debate it or whatever we want. But it is true that if you're diverting resources to Ukraine, it means less resources to Taiwan. And if Taiwan is your main supplier for key technologies like semiconductors, it's natural that the people with the money, namely the automobile industry, the electronic industry, are going to have a say in this regard. So you want to protect one front without threatening the other front. But this is all about foreign policy. Now, why am I saying this? Well, although Ukraine will be a topic during the elections, it won't be the only solely determining variable, of course. That's only one point of the foreign policy. I mean, you have a plethora of issues to be dealt with. I think that one other leading considerations are pensions. Pensions, as you mentioned, you have an aging population, and pensions are definitely a topic that it always comes during the elections. Healthcare is also one of the leading points. I mean, we saw the recovery of the United States after the COVID pandemic, but still we have a massive struggle, especially in the southern states. So that's also one thing. And obviously, race. I mean, the topics about Black Lives Matter and discrimination, that's also a leading topic that will be a leading discussion during the elections.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
All right. So I can see some differences regarding the topics that are being discussed in Europe or in the US. I think the common thing is, of course, migration, especially the illegal one, which is also a huge topic in the EU. And pensions as well. I think these are the two commons. Of course, Ukraine, but China as well. Because European markets are quite dependent on the Chinese market, especially I would say Germany, and all of the smaller economies are connected to Germany. I mean, they are anchored. That's the term. So crisis in Germany means also crisis in smaller economies, and it is actually happening. So we don't know what we can also predict in the future. But so coming to an end. So of course, Democratic Party and Republican Party are in general, let's say, different. But I'm pretty sure there is some breach between them. Well, we already discussed Ukraine, and actually the support that is in majority of both parties. But are there any other issues that somehow can connect them?
Yeah, I think that's an important question. I want to just jump in and say that so I'm working as a congressional staffer for a few years before grad school, and I think that there is a lot of talk around the polarization that exists in the U.S. right now, and I don't deny it. There's a lot of polarization, but my experience is that if you want to get anything done in Congress or certainly in the administration, you still need to have bipartisan support. And nothing passes the finish line in the U.S. political system right now without bipartisan support. And so I think that it's important to remember that those points of agreement still exist. I think that, as you mentioned, China's a really important one. There continues to be a lot of bipartisan support. This is niche, but we've got the Farm Bill coming up this fall. That is, no one disagrees on the importance of food aid, but also food exports. So there's stuff out there.
Mm-hmm. And Katja, do you see any other common topics?
I mean, I think the aspects that unite bipartisan, both parties mostly deal with foreign policy. Why? Because domestic policy, I mean, in the United States, and I mean, you can take the word on this. I mean, I think you have more insights on domestic policy than I do. I focus more on foreign policy. It's the military for sure. I mean, it's trade and it's the military, it's security. I mean, those are the ones that we could see bipartisan support. Where exactly is the line where you talk about where the funds are coming from? I mean, where exactly are we gonna take the funds to do something outside? Because this has always been the narrative at which bipartisan support is being sold or it's been taken from. So if you sell to the American voters that we're gonna take the funds from the pensions, from the health, from the education, then it's a lost game. It's a lost game. And this, you can see it in smaller states. I mean, be that Minnesota, be that Massachusetts. Well, Massachusetts, that's so. But I mean, be that Iowa, be that Colorado. I mean, those are the ones that have more to say on domestic than in foreign politics. Why? Because that's that's where the money of the electorate it's mainly invested on in agriculture, transportation, and secondly, I mean, you have other states like Texas whose focus is completely different than in other states. So let's not forget that the U.S. is still like a federation. So the state agendas also matter a lot. And that is one of the biggest complexities. I mean, you can take the word on this. I mean, the complexity of the U.S. Political system, and not only like, I mean, moving away from the entire elections, but on a daily basis, it is complicated to get something done in the House and in the Hill in general, or in the House and the Senate, because there's so many overlapping issues and there's so much process to be made that consultation it's taken on a regular basis, right? Then you have the associations, you have the workers' associations, you have the syndicates. I mean, it is a complicated landscape. And that's why when we criticize or when we talk about US politics, it's so hard to visualize the entire process and to understand why certain decisions in foreign policy are taking the shape that they are. I mean, we sometimes demand the world from the US in terms of support, in terms of aid, in terms of X, Y, Z. But then the reality is that the Americans have also a say on this. And the Americans, I mean, in the end, what they want, as much as in Poland and as much as the United States, they also want to keep a degree of safeguard.
All right.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for this extremely interesting conversation. So my last questions to you would be, is America great, or we should make it great again? Is it a great country? Well, we're leaving you with this question. Thank you very much for your time, and I'm wishing our viewers a very nice day and see you very soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.